The year Mark lost his memory, I lied to him and said I was his girlfriend. Later, we unexpectedly had a child. He was so overjoyed that he got down on one knee and proposed to me. But just when I thought my secret love had finally paid off, he suddenly regained his memory. He blamed me for deceiving him, threatened that he would never acknowledge the child, and had someone drag me to have an abortion. On the operating table, I died of 2 diseases. When I opened my eyes again, it was still the same ward. On the hospital bed, Mark still had his eyes tightly closed. The atmosphere in the room was depressing. I remember the doctor said that if he didn't wake up today, he would most likely become a vegetable. Mark's mother sobbed quietly, and my mother comforted her. There is still time, I will definitely wake up. I don't remember the details of Mark's awakening that year. But my mom was right, he would definitely wake up. My mother turned around and saw me in a daze, and waved to me. Nancy, come and talk to Mark, let your mother Mark have a rest. Mark's mother looked at me when she heard this. Those were 2 elders who loved me very much since I was a child. Even after Mark regained his memory, they always stood firmly by my side. But I want to refuse, but now I can't refuse. Just as I was about to reach the bed, Mark's eyelids twitched. I never thought that one day he would be able to look me in the eyes so calmly. In his previous life, after he regained his memory, the way he looked at me was always full of malice. We never had a good meal or spoke to each other again. He blamed me for being scheming and threatened that he would never acknowledge the baby in my belly. I know I am in the wrong, and I accept all of this. But why did he change his mind later and kill my child? That's his own child too. The intense emotions in my heart forced me to be unable to calm down. I looked away and subconsciously stepped back. Mark's mother rushed forward excitedly. Not long after, Mark's father and my father also rushed to the hospital. Mark woke up, which was great news for them. But he lost his memory. After crying bitterly, Mark's mother began to introduce them to him one by one. Mark, they're your Uncle Nancy's father and Mother Nancy, and our 2 families are old friends. This is Nancy, your father Nancy's daughter, and yours too. When it was my turn, I suddenly came to my senses and spoke out suddenly. Sister. This is a subconscious reaction. I haven't forgotten that in the last life, Mark's mother had the final say. At this time I introduced myself to Mark as his girlfriend. But in fact, Mark has a girlfriend. But in the eyes of Mark's mother, most of the blame for his car accident lies with his girlfriend Jane. It is said that a few days before the car accident, Jane proposed to get engaged. Mark didn't agree. In a fit of anger, Jane broke up with him and planned to run away abroad. Mark had the accident on the way to the airport. Mark's mother didn't like Jane from the beginning, and now her prejudice against her is even deeper. She told me that we could use Mark's amnesia as an opportunity to develop our relationship. Sometimes I wonder, even the elders of both families can see that I like Mark, but does he really not know? No, he should know. But, he still regarded my love for him as the same kind of love a sister had for her brother when they were children. In my previous life, Mark's mother's suggestion made my heart beat like thunder. What makes me even more confused is how easily Mark accepted this. Finally, during the time he was recovering in the hospital, he only wanted me to take care of him closely. We started with a lie, but ended with him regaining his memory. He believed that I was a complete liar and even thought that the arrival of the child was planned by me. No matter how I explained, he didn't believe that it was really an accident that night. I have no credibility in his eyes anymore. But Mark, you are cruel to me and to your own children. I touched my flat belly and my heart felt like it was stabbed by a knife. That child, he was gone before he even had a chance to grow up. It was my fault. So if I had the chance to do it all over again, how could I let myself make the same mistake again? After a moment of surprise, Mark's mother continued, yes, you 2 grew up together and are closer than real siblings. The elders talked excitedly about interesting things that happened in the past. Only Mark was staring at me silently with his deep black eyes. The doctor came quickly and gave him a full body check, and I found an excuse to leave. Until I walked out of the hospital gate, I still felt like it all was a dream. But I can't tell whether the rebirth is a dream, or the love-hate entanglement with Mark is a dream. Just when my head was about to explode, my cell phone rang. When I saw the caller ID, I was stunned for a long time before I answered the call. Frank's voice sounded anxious on the phone. Nancy, where are you? Frank, why, are you calling me at this time? Frank was my desk mate in high school and he also pretended to be my boyfriend. After knowing that Mark had a girlfriend, I didn't want to be outdone and told him that I was also in a relationship. Mark was stunned for a moment, but soon laughed. He rubbed the top of my head not too gently and said, "The little girl is great, she has grown up." The tone of voice sounded very old-fashioned, even though he was not much older than me. 2 days later, he asked me to bring my boyfriend out for dinner. I couldn't think of anyone else, so I asked Frank for help. At the dinner table, Frank was very thoughtful and considerate of me. Mark joked at the time, "You are better at taking care of people than I am." But after dinner, he asked me again, "I can see that he likes you, but I can't see that you like him." After listening to this, I felt sad and bitter. Because, of course I don't like Frank. I didn't take Mark's words to heart. Not long after, Frank actually confessed to me. Although he was rejected in the end, he still insisted on remaining friends with me. It wasn't until Mark regained his memory and became disgusted with me that Frank expressed his feelings to me again. But at that time I was already pregnant, exhausted both physically and mentally, and had no time to care about anything else. Then, I died. Don't ask so many questions. I want to see you, right now. Tell me where you are. Pulling my thoughts back from the memories, my mind was a little stuck. Because at this time, Frank had just been rejected by me and was on a business trip. After I hung up the phone, an incredible thought filled my mind. If I can be reborn, then can Frank be reborn too? After all, it was only later that he called me Nancy. Before that, he always called me Nancy. Soon, my guess was confirmed. Frank didn't keep me waiting long. The first thing he did after getting off the car was run towards me and gave me a big hug. There was also an expression of surprise and joy on his face, which only I could understand. "Sorry I got so excited. I had a horrible dream where you bled a lot." I was handcuffed between his hands and slowly lowered my eyes. Frank and I were both reborn, but I didn't want to recall those painful things anymore. "It's just a dream, don't make a fuss." I said this with a relaxed smile, and Frank looked at me for a while and smiled too. There was a determined light in his eyes, completely unlike the depressed look he had when I rejected him in his previous life. "You are right, but this dream made me realize that I will only feel at ease if I am with you in person. Nancy, I'm not in a hurry, so don't be in a hurry to reject me, okay?" Burned by the heat in his eyes, I subconsciously broke away from him. Just when I didn't know what to say, a familiar and cold voice sounded behind me. "Oops, it's Mark." He came over with the help of his assistant, his eyes fixed on me. This look is very complicated. There is strangeness, dependence, tenderness, and a little bit of grievance. But what is he feeling wronged about? "Mark, you." After being surprised, Frank stared at Mark warily. But Mark didn't look at him, and what he said next surprised me even more. "Even though I have temporary amnesia, it doesn't mean I won't remember." I didn't believe what my mother said at first, but just now, I believed it. He suddenly became humble. "Nancy, I'm sorry. I temporarily forgot that I like you very much, but before I remember, please don't think about others, okay?" I don't know what's wrong with Mark. During the tense confrontation between him and Frank, I fled in panic. Escape back to your bachelor apartment. 2 days later, my mother came to arrest the man. After you left that day, your mother Mark told Mark that you were the one he liked and that he was pursuing you. But the result is that you lost your memory, so you are angry. But I'm almost angry now. Come with me to the hospital to see him. If the target of the rumor was not me, I would really like to applaud Mark's mother for her ability to make up stories. No wonder Mark suddenly went crazy that day. But if I did it again and changed the lie, how could he still be so easily fooled? 2 days are enough for me to sort out my past and present life. I believe that his intention was not to kill me. I was the first to be wishful thinking and throw myself into the fire. He just doesn't love me. I can't change the relationship between the two families, nor can I change others. So I can only change myself. I used the studio work as an excuse to fool my mother, and she turned around and looked at me in confusion. When Mark first got into trouble, weren't you worried? Why are you so reluctant to go and see him now? Did you two have a fight? I was a little amused and confused. Mom, he doesn't remember anything, why should I argue with him? There really is something wrong. Besides, he is fine now. There are some truths that are destined to be known only by me. Even if my mother knew me well, she would never have imagined that I was reborn. It's just that my mom is easy to deal with, but Frank is not. Fortunately, I didn't plan to keep it a secret from him forever. In my previous life, after Frank came back from his business trip, Mark and I were already together. He did not comment on my choice and even tried to scold me to wake me up and stop deceiving myself. But at that time, Mark, who had lost his memory, was only thinking about me, and I was already addicted to it. With the support of my elders, I am willing to take a gamble. It's just that the ending is not satisfactory. I'm not surprised that Frank came to the studio. In a few days, he saw that the plot was different from that in his previous life. Even the most dull-witted person should have the answer in his mind. Nancy, are you? Looking back at his complicated gaze, I poured him a cup of tea and nodded neither lightly nor heavily. He stood up suddenly, his face full of shock. Her lips trembled and she seemed to have a lot to say, but in the end she just asked me in a low voice. So, do you still love him? Mark? I lowered my eyes and smiled bitterly. I love my life. Only when you lose something, do you truly understand what is most important. I can't even save my own life, let alone the baby in my belly. Thinking of my children, I couldn't help but ask. Did I really die on the operating table later? Mark, did he show up? My parents. If my parents knew that it was Mark who sent someone to abduct me and cause my death, how heartbroken they would be. Maybe I shouldn't have tried to fight for it after he got his memory back. I am too willful. I closed my eyes tightly and didn't notice Frank's face suddenly turned pale. I don't know either. I felt panicky that day for no reason. When I found you, you were in trouble. Then, in the blink of an eye, it was back. Frank stared at me closely, his tone slightly excited. Nancy, for once, don't get involved with him. This way you won't have children and you will still be yourself. He will recover his memory sooner or later, and his girlfriend will come back, and then. I know all this. I interrupted him lightly and said, I don't want to talk about the past anymore. It's just that the memories suddenly came flooding back like a floodgate. Mark looked unhappy that day, but I was still immersed in my fantasy about the wedding. She excitedly came up to him with a stack of wedding magazines, and he raised his hand and dropped all the magazines to the ground. He said I made him sick, and the next day he flew across the ocean to pick Jane up. I covered my face with my hands and really didn't want to think about it again. After Frank left, I sat there for a long time. Until the pot of tea is completely cold. Then, Mark came. The moment I saw him, I remembered that today seemed to be the day he was discharged from the hospital. Accompanied by his assistant, he toured the studio as if inspecting it. No sound was made. I composed myself and was about to ask him what he wanted when he suddenly turned around. The tone of voice is sarcastic. Auntie said you were very busy and had no time to accompany me out of the hospital, but you had the leisure time to drink tea and chat with other men. He emphasized the last few words particularly heavily. So, he was out there early? I frowned subconsciously. I didn't say I was going, but I wanted you to come. Even though the time we spent together through deception was not long, it is still deeply engraved in my heart. This is Mark after he lost his memory. In front of me, there is no aura of the chairman of the Mark family, and no sense of pressure from the superior. There are still some traces of youthful spirit on Qingjuan's face. He is a proud man. Unfortunately, reality slapped me in the face later. What is fake. I clenched my fists and said, Mark, your mother lied to you. I'm not the person you like. We just knew each other since childhood, not very familiar. Mark suddenly fell silent, staring at me with his dark peach eyes. You are still angry. I looked confused. Nancy, no one can fool me. That day at the gate, I saw that man hugging your shoulders, and at that moment, I believed what my mother said. And just now, when you were drinking tea and chatting, I felt very depressed. We are in our first love, how could we not be familiar with each other? If I hadn't experienced excruciating pain and paid a heavy price, I would never have been able to withstand such a Mark. Taking out my phone, I looked through Jane's selfies on WeChat Moments. Take a closer look. She, Jane, is your girlfriend, the one you like. Mark glanced at it casually, looked at it, and felt nothing. Not sure, let's take another look. Yeah, I've seen it clearly, it's not as good as you. I was silent for a long time. I was thinking to myself that something was wrong, and the after effects of this lie seemed to be even worse. Mark started hanging around my studio every now and then and I couldn't get him out of there. I was so angry that I gritted my teeth. Sneered at him, he never listened to Mark's mother so much. He defended himself seriously, I don't listen to anyone, I just believe in my own heart. After a pause, he softened his voice again. I want to see you, I like to look at you. Why didn't I realize before that he is quite eloquent? After all, in the last life, every day after we were together, I was happy and did not hide my love for him at all. Most of the time, I am the one who says the sweet words and he agrees with me. But what is the result? After he recovered his memory, he denied everything and only remembered that I had deceived him. Thinking of this, I smiled coldly. But I don't want to see you. You don't need to look at me, just draw yours, and draw seriously. After losing his memory, he became more and more shameless. But after treating him coldly for a few days, he couldn't help but ask me why I was so cold to him. I'm borrowing what he said earlier when he looked at Jane's photo. Because, I don't feel anything. This sentence was quite devastating. Mark didn't come again for several days. I couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Some people simply cannot be seen, otherwise, I don't know what kind of mood I should use to face them. The sincerity and innocence in his eyes now only make me schizophrenic. I remind myself all the time, everything that happened in my previous life was not a nightmare, it was real. Nancy, you have to wake up. Unfortunately, the peaceful days did not last for a few days. Mark is here again. This time, Frank came almost as soon as he came in. Why is he here? Frank looked at me with disbelief and questioning eyes, and I couldn't help but frown. Before, Mark usually came in the morning and Frank came in the evening, so they never met each other. But I don't know what happened today, it just happened by chance. I understand what Frank means. He didn't want me to have anything to do with Mark anymore, but I didn't like his tone either. Why can't I be here? The hostility in Mark's eyes at this moment was no less than Frank's. He pursed his thin lips and his dark eyes were so deep that it was hard to tell his emotions. Frank narrowed his eyes, equally unwilling to be outdone. Because she doesn't like it. This is, directly pointing the finger at me. Mark looked at me, rather hurt, but quickly looked away. She doesn't like me, but does that mean she likes you? Then, two pairs of eyes looked at me. Very good, I took a deep breath and said coldly, I like none of them. Mark heard this and immediately raised his chin proudly. No, what is he proud of? It's just unbearable to watch. I sat back in the studio and continued painting, ignoring them. But the more you try to ignore it, the more difficult it becomes. What's more, they both have loud voices. Mark, I don't care what's wrong with you, just don't bother Nancy anymore. On what grounds do you say this to me? According to my investigation, you two have already broken up, and exes should behave like exes. Frank sounded angry. That's between us, it has nothing to do with you. Mark retorted lightly, there is no need for you to interfere in the matter between me and her. Do you know how you lost your memory? You did it for another woman. If you provoke Nancy now, how will you explain it when you regain your memory one day? Don't worry about it, I know what I'm doing. Even if I regain my memory someday, I will only recognize Nancy. He said he only recognized me. A trembling hand can ruin a painting. This is probably the funniest sentence ever. Outside, Frank laughed. You can't do it, you can't do it. Really, don't come to her again, otherwise, you will only hurt her. I suddenly got up from my chair and walked out of the studio. Frank. I was afraid he would say too much, but Mark kept dwelling on this issue. Frank's eyes were a little distracted, and he said quietly. In my dream, you hurt Nancy badly. She bled a lot, and the floor was covered with blood. Mark frowned at that, then fought back unceremoniously. Same here, I had the dream too, and you are the culprit. What kind of childish debate is this? Anyone with an elementary school diploma wouldn't be like this. Just when I wanted to tell them to go away. Frank suddenly yelled, you are talking nonsense. He lunged at Mark and threw a direct punch. Mark's cheekbones immediately turned red after being hit, and he quickly fought back with a punch. The two men quickly started fighting each other. I was shocked. They stopped only when their throats were about to smoke from shouting. Mark was still sitting on the ground, looking rather disheveled. He said miserably, I sprained my foot and can't get up. Are you counting on me to help you? That's impossible. Call your assistant. After giving him a cold look, I said to Frank, you go first. Frank also had some scratches on his face, but they didn't look serious. The main reason is that I am tired of both of them and now I don't want to see them again. As Frank walked away, his eyes looked particularly hurt. Nancy, you are still partial to him. I wanted to say I didn't, but he kept mumbling those words over and over again. You simply can't forget him, you know the ending, but you still favor him. You will regret it, you will regret it. I simply shut up and went back to the studio, not wanting to say a single word. I don't know when Mark left. I don't know what he told his family when he got back. Anyway, that night, my mother called me back. The meal was peaceful, but after it, she pulled me into the room. I took out a photo album, which I had compiled myself, an exclusive album of Mark and me. Did Mom misunderstand me? Nancy, do you not like Mark anymore? This is a problem that we have to face sooner or later. Fortunately, I had already thought of a way to deal with it. Well, I don't like it anymore. My mother was still a little surprised to hear me admit it in person. Can you tell me why? Mark is very serious about you now. He even came to see me and your parents. I interrupted her gently and said nonchalantly. The reason is very simple. I have thought it through. He must like Jane very much, otherwise he wouldn't have rushed to the airport to chase her. Although he has lost his memory now, it is said that people who lose their memory have drastic changes in their personalities, so this cannot be believed. I think you should go and persuade Mark's mother. Sooner or later, he will recover his memory. Let Mark's mother be more open-minded and accept Ms. Jane. I easily evaded my mother, who also felt that Mark, who had lost his memory, was unreliable. That's right, he is not only unreliable now, but also very troublesome. Mark came to the studio every now and then to have tea, using the excuse that he was beaten on my turf. Sometimes I wonder why he became so shameless after losing his memory. You can't scold him away, and why doesn't he come back to life? If he could do it all over again, he would still remember the past, and I wouldn't have to suffer this torture. Yes. If he regained his memory, he wouldn't bother me anymore. After much thought, I decided to contact Jane. But unexpectedly, Frank contacted her before me. Nancy, I don't want you to be hurt by Mark again. I know you're in a dilemma. After all, he is not who he will be in the future. I also know that Jane bullied you. When Mark regains his memory, I will make them pay for what they have done. Looking at Frank, who was a little crazy, I shook my head calmly. Frank, I am grateful to you, both in past lives and in this one. My blessings to you remain the same, and what I want to say remains the same. You don't have to waste your time on me anymore. If I were to do it again, I would think clearly that I am not here to take revenge on anyone. Cause and effect, the cause is myself. So, don't worry that I will make the same mistake again, because I won't. I refused Frank's participation and was also saying goodbye to my previous self. When Jane learned that Mark had lost his memory, she burst into tears on the phone. I know, he didn't mean to avoid me. She also thanked me. Until I told her that Mark now mistakenly thought that the person he liked was me. Jane's face changed drastically and she asked me what I did to Mark. But this time, I didn't do anything. Because I'm the person Mark likes now, Jane still holds a grudge against me. To be honest, I wish I could stay away from them. In the previous life, after Mark brought Jane back, they announced their reunion in a high-profile manner in the circle. They are the right person for each other. And I am the despicable and shameless person who takes advantage of others. Jane brought her sisters to the studio more than once to mock and ridicule me. The last time, it was Mark's mother who helped me out. Mark's mother didn't approve of her, so she said to others, that's because of the baby in my belly. All in all, the arrangement is ugly. As someone who was not loved, I had no room for rebuttal. Jane undoubtedly has some means. But I didn't expect that this time, her return would mean so much to Mark. Without any effect. In my limited understanding, a lover's love has the opportunity to awaken memories of the past. That's how it's played out on TV. But when it came to Mark, something unexpected happened. He was totally indifferent to Jane's appearance, let alone any chance that Jane could get close to him. It is said that Mark directly drove people out of the Mark family building, leaving Jane crying and shouting in frustration in front of the building. That's what a man is. Love and not love are so decisive. Jane was at a loss as to what to do, so she had to reluctantly ask me for help. I didn't have any hesitation. After sending her the location of the studio, he closed the door. When I went out again, I heard Mark's cold and heartless voice. Which one should you choose, 5 million or calling the police? Mark. Ms. Jane, I have amnesia, not dementia. I can't find any trace of loving you in my past life. Before I could figure out what this meant, Jane made her decision. I chose $5 million. Jane left and Mark didn't even give her a side glance. Don't love Jane? How is that possible? The man's deep eyes suddenly looked over at me, filled with emotions I couldn't understand. When I came to my senses, he was already standing in front of me. Don't you want to see me? He knows. Perhaps it was because she was shocked by the strong emotion in his voice. I opened my lips, but no sound came out. The silence continued, and Mark just stood there in front of me. I clenched my fists tightly, but when I opened my mouth, my voice was a little hoarse. Move aside, I want to go out. Mark still didn't move, so I turned around and went back to the studio. Behind him, the man's hoarse voice was filled with reluctance and doubt. Nancy, what happened to make it like this between you and me? Are you hiding something from me? And what about you and that Frank, what does he know? Mark left again. I don't think he will come again this time. Because I asked him. I also have 5 million, do you want to choose? He didn't want to see Jane. I don't want to see him either. My life returned to normal. Without discussing it with my family, I applied to schools abroad. Until the results come out, the studio will continue to operate in a semi-non-profit manner. More and more children from surrounding residences come to learn painting. Looking at their tender and lovely faces and their clear and happy voices. I am getting busier and busier. Mark, Jane. Their business cards are lying quietly in my friend list, and I don't know how long I have to scroll down the chat window to find them. And as I deliberately ignored it, the news about Frank became less and less. I know. Saying goodbye to the past also means saying goodbye to the people from the past. I like this kind of busyness, if it weren't for the birthday red envelope my mother sent me in advance. I almost forgot this day. The night Mark and I got pregnant unexpectedly. At this time in my previous life, Frank had just opened a new bar and he wanted to hold a simple birthday party for me. I refused, after all, Mark was my boyfriend at the time. However, to celebrate the opening of his bar, I suggested that we celebrate my birthday in the bar. Just think of it as adding some popularity to the bar. But unexpectedly, something unexpected happened on the first night, and Mark drank unclean alcohol. A ridiculous night. This time, Frank didn't open a bar. Therefore, repeated accidents will never happen again. Let this day be like any other day. So ordinary that it couldn't be more ordinary. But in the evening, when we were about to finish work, Frank came with flowers, wine and cake. What are you doing? Won't you help me? I carried so many things. I reached out my hand subconsciously, but Frank dodged it. Are you kidding? How can we let today's birthday boy work? I felt a little bit fooled. But his carefree smile and eloquent tone of voice reminded me of the ease and comfort I felt when I was studying in the past. Coupled with his subsequent words "long time no see," I felt even more guilty. During this period of time, I deliberately distanced myself from him. In the beginning, he repeatedly reminded me to remember the lessons of the past, etc., but later on, it just became simple daily greetings. He said he was afraid that I would bother him, so he should type less. I don't like to read a long string of messages. Frank. Why do you look like you're about to cry? Are you being bullied? I quickly shook my head, leaned against the wall, watched him busying around, and exhaled slowly. Thank you. Frank paused what he was doing, sorted everything out without saying a word, and handed me a glass of wine. Want a drink? Before I could respond, he retracted his hand. This time they changed to a glass of juice, and Frank said with a smile, "Girls should not drink alcohol, it's better to drink this." I raised my eyebrows, didn't take it, and reached for the glass of wine. No. I'm going to drink this today. His eyes lit up instantly and he clinked his glass with me with a smile. Then I'll do it, you can do whatever you want, celebrate the new life. Come to think of it, this is the first time we have eaten together since our rebirth. Certainly, this is the first glass of wine I've had in a long time. Maybe it's because I haven't had a drink in a while, and after finishing a glass, I felt a little drunk. We haven't talked enough about the embarrassing things that happened when we were students, so I thank him for not bringing up those unpleasant things today. Nancy? What's wrong with you? I could barely hold up my head with one hand. I curled my lips and said, "It's okay, I haven't had a drink for a long time, and I'm a little drunk." Frank asked with concern, "You are blushing, can I help you go to rest?" "No, I can't drink anymore. I'll just drink water. Then I'll go get some water." He quickly poured me a glass of water and I held out my hand. When I took the cup, I accidentally touched his hand. It was icy and cool, so comfortable. Nancy. Huh? A hand was placed on my face, and it felt as cold as before. I couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief, but the next second, I realized it was Frank's hand. Frank you. Frank's face kept getting bigger in front of my eyes. In my blurry vision, his expression was so calm and strange. But his eyes were exceptionally bright. He was clearly saying things that showed his concern for me, but the look in his eyes didn't change at all. Your face is so hot, is this comfortable? Frank, you go away first. I slapped his hand away with some difficulty and tried to find my phone, but couldn't find it. Frank's voice was filled with anger. Why do you always tell me to go away? Nancy, why is it always me who leaves? That's not what I meant. I was drunk and asked my mom to pick me up. Are you looking for your phone? Frank asked me, and then I was shocked to see him take my phone out of his pocket. He said, "I turned off your phone a long time ago, Nancy. No one will disturb us tonight. Nancy, you have to believe that I am the only one who loves you and will not leave you. I'm here to help you." What is he talking about? What is he doing? Frank is crazy. Alcoholic. I staggered to my feet, but I had no strength left and immediately fell back down. Frank hugged me from behind, his face behind my ear, breathing hot air. Don't be afraid, it won't harm you afterwards. I was so scared that tears came out. Frank, you can't do this, don't do this. But no matter what I said, his hands still kept wandering on my body. I closed my eyes in despair. Suddenly, the shackles on my body disappeared. Mark's angry voice came from behind. Frank, you deserve to die. Mark pulled Frank out. I held my breath in the studio, listening to the noise outside. That was the sound of force hitting flesh, one after another. But they didn't make any verbal exchanges, so I didn't know who was hitting who. The cell phone is on the other side of the table. I can't get it. Mark. 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 I started calling his name over and over again, but there was no response. My heart plummeted at this moment. It felt like an eternity had passed before Mark's tall figure finally appeared in my field of vision. I couldn't help but cry. A pair of strong hands picked me up. This embrace was both familiar and unfamiliar to me. Mark. It's me. I want to go home. His voice was extremely deep, and he said, okay. Mark didn't take me home after all because the effects of my drugs completely broke out on the way. Can you please set the air conditioner to the lowest setting? I'm so hot. It's already the lowest. No way, you lied to me. I didn't lie to you. I felt so sad that I wanted to cry and could only keep calling his name. Urge him. Mark, hurry up. Mark, could you please hurry up? Any faster and I really can't stand it. Mark, please. I don't know what got him mad, but he just parked his car in a park he passed by. I was carried from the passenger seat to the back seat and shrank back in resistance. My shoe fell off during the struggle and he grabbed my foot. Nancy, let me help you first. I shook my head violently. No, you can't, you can't. She cried as she spoke, but she couldn't help but hug him. Don't cry. Don't touch me. But you can't stand it, and neither can I. My body felt so hot that it was about to melt, and the bone-gnawing feeling was both unfamiliar and unbearable. I knew I couldn't go on, but my self-control has never been very good. When I was a kid, even if I coughed until my face turned red, I would still secretly eat a piece of marshmallow. I thought about reviewing well before the exam, but I decided to play first. Even though I knew it was wrong to lie to him, I couldn't help but want to be with him. My consciousness gradually faded. I grabbed his hair and sobbed, I can't. I know. Often over and over again, when finally I was tired and dazed, I would hear the man's suppressed and hoarse voice in my ears. He said, Nancy, I'm sorry. It was me who failed to protect you and the child. My head exploded with a bang. Mark is back too. Very timely too. When I woke up again, I was in bed in Mark's apartment and he was leaning on the windowsill smoking a cigarette. Recalling what happened last night, no matter how embarrassing it was, at least I wouldn't have another child. This is the best result. Noticing that I was awake, Mark put out his cigarette and walked towards me. Nancy. I pulled the quilt higher to cover most of my face. You go out first and leave me alone. Knowing him, he should have obeyed, but he didn't. Not me, Nancy. It was a sentence without a beginning or an end, but I seemed to understand it. He said it wasn't him. It's Frank. Our unexpected child was the result of Frank's manipulation. On the night of our birthday at the bar, he actually prepared 2 drinks for us, but only Mark drank them. The person who brutally killed the baby in my belly was also Frank. He believed that I was attached to Mark because of the child, so he wanted to solve the problem at the source. Mark said that Frank later explained that his intention was never to hurt me. I just didn't expect that the private doctor I found was unreliable. Both the child and I died because of his self-righteousness. My mind is in a mess. But after what happened last night, I already believed most of what they said. I won't be going to the studio recently, so you can stay here first. I looked up in confusion, and Mark's handsome face looked very serious. Frank has mania. I also heard about what happened later from Mark's assistant. After all, I don't want to connect with Mark, so the middleman can only be his special assistant. I know that Frank has been trading stocks privately, and he had been researching it when he was in school. If he had the chance to do it again, he would remember those hot stocks from that year. However, due to the wrong timing of buying and selling, huge losses occurred. He lost interest in work and borrowed money from everywhere, which led to him being heavily in debt. In the end, mania turned into bipolar disorder and he jumped off the roof. I'm not sure if Mark had any hand in this, but even if he did, it's understandable. After that night, I can still remember the words Frank used to insult me. He said that I was willing to be a humiliator and would still voluntarily lie under Mark if we had to do it again. He didn't know that Mark was back too. I don't know that night Mark and I. It was just the loss of a life, and only 3 months had passed. During this time, my mother accompanied Mark's mother to the apartment to find Mark, but found that I lived here. Looking at the two of them grinning secretly, I didn't want to explain anything. But 3 months later, my application notification came out. Although my parents nag me about doing something else at my age, they still go along with my wishes and their actions. They took the initiative to learn about the local climate, environment, and culture of foreign countries, and have even started planning to visit me several times a year. I don't know if Mark said anything to his parents. In short, Mark's father and Mark's mother no longer mention us in front of me. This really made it easier for me to deal with them. The day I boarded the plane, Mark didn't come. I know he understands me. Even though he didn't do some things, it doesn't mean he didn't hurt me. If we start over again, some things will never happen again, but that doesn't mean the hurt no longer exists. The plane is about to take off. Please confirm again that your seatbelts are fastened and all electronic devices are turned off. Thank you. Goodbye, Mark. Recalling Mark, when I was 8 years old, I saw a photo of Nancy's mother on my father's computer. So many pictures. I asked my dad why there were so many photos of Nancy's mother. Dad created a classification album by person. You see, everyone has his own album. There's your mom's, there's your Nancy's dad's, and there's yours and Nancy's. When I looked, it was indeed true. But later I realized that those photos were all taken by my father. At the age of 12, Henry said he liked Nancy and wanted to marry her when he grew up. I got beaten, of course, I got beaten too. I began to think that I also liked Nancy and must marry her when I grew up. I took out the photo album and sketched Nancy's portrait. But suddenly I felt a shock. I thought of the photo of Nancy's mom saved in my dad's computer. Is it Nancy's mom that he likes? What about my mom? 16 years old, it was Nancy's birthday. Everyone said that she looked so much like Nancy's mother, and at first glance they were clearly mother and daughter. My dad and I look alike, and we can obviously be father and son. So do we all have to like that similar face? No, I don't like it. Through my constant observation, I can be sure that my dad really likes Mom Nancy. He always peeks at Nancy's mother, and occasionally picks up his phone inadvertently. I guess he is taking a secret photo of Nancy's mother. But I never had the chance to touch his computer again. After my observation, Nancy's mother seemed to be unaware of this. So, should I praise my dad or should I praise my dad? This is a suffocating home. Mark, what are you thinking about? Nancy's fair face suddenly came into my sight, and her eyes were almost exactly the same as Nancy's mother's. I turned my head away woodenly and said indifferently, nothing. I know Nancy depends on me a lot, but I don't know if this dependence is love. The elders teased her, asking what kind of boyfriend she would look for in the future. She said she wanted to find someone like me. He added, but you love to laugh more than I do. That's not me. I took a deep breath and it was okay. I didn't like her in the same way as a man and a woman. In order to prove myself, I treated her better and better, but I was still able to date someone else. I didn't expect that the girl also had a boyfriend. It was pretty good, but I suddenly felt that love was boring and uninteresting, so I broke up with Jane. She wanted to go abroad, and I let her go. When she arrived at the airport, she threatened to commit suicide again. It was really boring. I had a car accident and lost my memory. The memory has been restored. Nancy is pregnant with my child. My dad actually looked at me with envy. It was so fucking disgusting, it instantly washed away the excitement and joy that came with Nancy saying she loved me. My mother also promised Nancy's mother that she would let me marry Nancy. I wanted to escape from them. They had teamed up to deceive me, so how could I be so easily manipulated? My mother said that something happened to Nancy, and she went to a small institution to have an abortion alone, and both she and the baby were gone. My eyes went dark and my ears started ringing. Even after Mark regained his memory, they always stood firmly by my side. She loves children so much, and I didn't know that there was a character like Frank jumping around between her and me. I deserved to die. Nancy, wait for me. Maybe it was God's will that I was reborn. We will never allow a scum like Frank to stay with Nancy. But Nancy, she doesn't want to come back to me. Even if we keep silent about the past, I know it. She didn't want to. In this life, Nancy chose to go abroad. I watched the plane soar into the sky and suddenly raised my hand to catch it. In the end, he could only wave his hand. I guess I became my dad after all.